inflation, which is, by the way, the ultimate tax in the world with people that don't realize it. But it will, of course, it'll increase the value of certain assets, et cetera, which erodes away the natural capital of the debt. So that is the basis for a lot of people going with interest-only mortgages, because actually the central bank...
You found the Real Estate Law Podcast, because real estate is more than just pretty pictures, and law goes well beyond the paperwork and courtroom arguments. If you're a real estate professional or looking to build real estate expertise, then welcome to the conversation and discover more at realestatelawpodcast.com.
Welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Law Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Jason Muth, and we are here with an international guest this week, all the way from the UK. We're going to hear what's happening in the property and real estate scene in the United Kingdom. We are really eager to hear that because we have not had any guests on, Rory, from the United Kingdom just yet. We've had guests from Canada, so Rob will not be our first international guest, but I can't wait to hear how what we're seeing here in the United States is similar to what Rob is seeing in the UK. So let me welcome Rory, actually, our co-host, Rory from NextHome, Titletown Real Estate and UrbanVillage Legal in Boston. Hi, Rory.
Hey, Jason. I'm excited for this conversation, not only to broaden our scope geographically, but also investment strategies. I think Rob has an interesting story with the work that he's done in that space. So I'm happy to hear all of that too. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So we should introduce our guest. It's Rob Smallbone, or Robert Smallbone is more proper. He is an author. He is a real estate podcast host himself. He has the Property Nomads Podcast, which is actually all about real estate and travel, two of his passions. And he is an author. You could buy his books on Amazon. He just released a brand new book called Property FAQs, Answers to Frequently Asked Property Questions. I'm sure some of that pertains to the United States as well. He also has a couple of the books on there, 50 No-Nonsense Ways to Increase Your Sales Today, and Buy to Let, How to Get Started. And because we are smart and international, we know that let means rent. Correct, Rory?
Of course, yes.
Rob, welcome to the podcast.
Jason, Rory, thank you very much. And no pressure representing the United Kingdom on today's episode.
The entire kingdom. And we've been to the United Kingdom multiple times, multiple outposts of the kingdom as well. I first have to say, I apologize for having my shirt match the microphone cover. I did not expect that I'd be wearing the same exact blue, but here we are. Rob, I kind of wish we hit record on the Zoom, which we were using to record this before we did, because we had some lovely chatter about such awesome topics as Liverpool FC and the New York Jets. Goodness. Did you find your way to being the one fan of the New York Jets?
Great question. So in a nutshell, when I went to university in 2006, I played at guard position. I mean, our quality of university football is nothing in comparison to college football, of course. So completely different game as such. Played guard for a little bit. And as a result of that, every Sunday you go down the pub and watch Red Zone, as we do. And, people would sort of, who's your team? I had no idea. But New York was the first place I went to in the USA. I was in a sports shop. I was with my brother, and I saw some blue jerseys, saw some green jerseys. And I went, I quite like the look at the green ones, picked up a jersey. It had a guy called Revis on the back. No idea who he was, but that sounds all right. And bought the shirt. And of course, Darrell Revis Island. And there you are. So it could have been anyone. It could have been the Giants, but it ended up being the Jets.
Well, green is the color of U.S. money as well, so maybe that's something that had to do with that. But boy, the Jets have had a tough run in basically their history ever since Joe Namath. And I grew up outside New York City. I grew up in a Giants family. We had tickets for the New York Giants, a Giants stadium, which is now MetLife Stadium. In the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, you were either a Giants fan or a Jets fan, but you're kind of not both. And then I ended up moving to New England, and I've been a Patriots fan since the mid-90s. When I was in college. I know you're nodding your head right there. I did not jump the bandwagon when I came to Boston because I was a fan of the Pats beforehand. So I've just been circling the wagon of the Jets between the Giants and the Patriots. And hey, at least last year the Patriots didn't do as well. So the Jets had a little bit more of a shot.
The one thing I've taken away, and it's actually quite pertinent to all business models. So people that are listening and thinking, oh God, it's 40 minutes of football. No, it's not. If you look at the Jets' head office, front office for the last, I don't know, before Joe Douglas, pretty much run like a horror show. No strategy, no organization. Well, if there was organization, it was very bad. No direction. And what the owners have done, whether it's Woody Johnson or his brother, whomever, they've brought in Joe Douglas, got a good track record. He's brought in Coach Salah as well. And for the first time in, I think, my tenure of supporting them, we had a competent draft on paper, which is remarkable because we now got this strategy and this philosophy of how we want to play football. And that, I think, reflects off the field. At the end of the day, you're not going to have a successful organisation if you're not run well off the field. And, you know, it's been painful being in the same division as New England. Okay, yes, you know, they had the GOAT. Yes, Belichick is also the GOAT at coaching as far as I'm concerned. You know, they're a well-oiled machine off the field. So if we can start replicating that, I'm not expecting miracles for the forthcoming season. Our schedule's a pain in the backside. If we play hardball, win 5 or 6 games, that's an improvement. That bodes well. But what I've been thinking about it is off the field, it's been a bit of a horror show, but actually we're starting, I think, to change that. But that applies to any business. If you're right off the field, you're going to be good on the field. And, you know, hopefully that will show this season.
Rory, I'd expect nothing but excellent analysis from a guest from the United Kingdom for U.S. pro football. And we would not have heard that from a New York Jets fan had we interviewed them, because you've gone deep into their organization. Just what I'm hearing for you, you kind of peel the layers back as to why there are problems, not just that there are problems, which actually is a great lesson for business. But, you know, I'll just leave it at this. The great news about the New York Jets is after every season, they probably get together and say, well, there's nowhere to go but up. So, you know, next year, it's always a new campaign.
Yeah. And Jason, it's your turn to give us some analysis about Liverpool. Go.
Yeah, I don't think I can give you a lick of analysis on Liverpool. Why don't we talk about some real estate or some property? So is property the word that's used more frequently in the United Kingdom, or is real estate synonymous with that, or are those two kind of different categories?
Yeah, it's the same thing, but it's property. If you're speaking to anyone in the UK, we always say property. You might get the very odd person that says real estate, but 99 times out of 100, if you're talking UK, you're talking the property market. That's probably, it's the same thing, effectively, just different words.
Before we launch into the sports podcast, what was your genesis of interest in property? What brought you into property investing?
Good question. So my business partner and I, we met at university in 2006. Yeah, just chilled out, didn't really do, as you would do at university, involves a lot of alcohol. Point being, we've traveled a lot since then together, and we were on a trip in 2014, 2015, and we were, long bus journeys equals a lot of time to talk. And we were just saying that actually it'd be good to be able to continue to travel, but not have to go back and work, as in get into the habit of work for a few years, save up, rinse and repeat the process. And for all the asset classes that we knew about at the time, we decided that, property, for your listeners, I'm just going to call it property. Hopefully that doesn't confuse people too much. We just decided that property would actually be the best thing to do, because the end goal, and it still is the goal, is long-term wealth generation. And that doesn't happen overnight, as you know. So, we made that decision in 2015 and set up the company, Devoy Small Boat Properties, which is our purchasing company. And we set that up in 2016 and just started purchasing some property. So that's how it started.
What type of property have you found your way toward as, the asset class that you prefer?
So it's what we would call buy-to-let. So your typical single family rental units. Yeah, most of our stock's mid-terrace homes. So you get the really old rows of homes that you might be familiar with on photos. So we normally have mid-terraced homes. A reason for that is actually it's just that wasn't planned. It's just that's just how the portfolio looks. And we do that in the north of England, traditionally in the north of England. So you're talking, anywhere from Liverpool to Manchester to Hull to Newcastle, those sorts of places. The yield that you get, the return you get is pretty decent. So your cash flow is good. And most people that invest into UK property will go to the north of England because they're after the cash flow. So I say we're no different from that point of view. That's what a lot of the portfolio looks like at the moment. There's always going to be demand for housing. certainly in my lifetime, there will be. And we're not producing enough. So the simple economics are there and working in our favor.
If you're based in Brighton and you're on the road traveling quite a bit, how do you manage all those properties that are, pretty far from you?
So I will point out that I've only recently moved back to Brighton. I actually was living in Hull, Kingston upon Hull, for 4.5 years, which is where most of the portfolio was. Circumstances at the time allowed me to move. Rent's much cheaper up there, so I moved myself. Mm-hmm. And that was a good experience. In terms of management, lettings agents, I'm always a fan of, you can get, we call it landlords that manage themselves, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. But the way that Aaron and I think about it, we're thinking of, when we're out and about on the road, and if we want to be, traveling, be location independent as such, you might as well invest in the lettings agents. They're professionals at what they do. They're very good at what they do, as long as you find the right one. And, they can get rid of a lot of hassle for you. And to us, it's well worth the investment.
Did you ever start as your own letting agent or property manager, and then you passed it over to various ones in the cities and towns where you're investing? Or was your business model always to have a letting agent as part of your budget?
The latter. It was always to have a lettings agent as part of the budget. We always say start with the end in mind, and try and keep things as simple as possible. It's not always the case, but if you can try and keep things as simple as possible and have that end goal, 9 times out of 10, it will all go smoothly.
What are the typical fees in the UK for a letting agent? Are they 10, 15, 20% of rents, or how is that calculated?
So it depends on the agent. I would say the average for what we do is 10%. Some agents will include VAT, value added tax, and that's at 20% at the moment. The agents that we use don't do that. So if someone's paying £500 in rent, then you can expect the management fee to be £50.
Right. Rory, a lot of what Rob just mentioned sounds very similar to what we have here in the United States, where he's focusing on communities that generate cash flow. So, very similar to here in the US, where a lot of people will focus more on the Midwest or the Sun Belt, places like Arizona, Florida, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan. The coasts can be difficult to get cash flow in some situations, but it's not impossible. People here focus on having a rental property management company as part of their budget, and they should. Mm-hmm. I'm curious where they diverge. In fact, how UK strategy might diverge from the strategy in the US. Mortgages, how do you guys calculate mortgage interest and whatnot?
Good question. This might sound quite lazy, but we always hand out as many tasks as we can to professional people. So, mortgage broker, for example, would deal with that. What I can say is that when I say we start with the end in mind, we know that you guys know as well, and people listen to this, you're going to make your money when you buy. 9 times out of 10, you might, of course, add value and, increase the value of the property or the real estate. But normally, you make your money when you buy. And if you're getting it at a good price or you've added enough value, again, our philosophy is we'll go on to interest-only mortgages. We're not interested in paying down the capital. Why? Because we're looking at a very, very, very long-term view. And I say, inflation, normally they like to do it at about 2%. Of course, at the time this comes out, it's nothing like that, but in regular economic times as such. So, inflation's going to erode away the cost of the natural debt. So it makes sense to have it on interest only. So, again, basic economics, in my opinion. And hopefully that answers the question. I don't think that the strategies would divulge in a different way. It really all comes down to fundamentals. So, if you're investing in an area, so you say, for example, in the Midwest, or I'll take any city, I'm just going to say Newcastle over here. This is the sort of thing we'd look for is where is the demand? You're going to have some areas that are going to be good and some areas that are going to be not so good. what are the fundamentals? Are there schools? Are there hospitals? What's transport like? What are people after? And you can do a lot of that homework on the phone, ringing estate agents or realtors, I think you call them, ring lettings agents. You can do a lot of that on the phone, plus Google Maps as well. It will give you a good idea. So I don't think the fundamentals, I think, of property are going to be there. I think no matter what, to an extent, depending on the legal system, it shouldn't matter what country you do it in, the fundamentals will be there. Of course, I understand with ideologies around the world that it's easier said than done, but we're talking US, UK, I'm going to say they're going to be very, very similar. And a lot of that's down to, going to be down to legal systems and bits and bobs like that.
I do think it's fascinating to hear the similarities between both countries' property, real estate investing systems and strategy. I think that a lot of folks in the US might think that things are unique here, but everything you've said is, the same fundamentals that we look at when we make our own investments. Rory, a lot of your clients would probably listen to everything Rob just said and say, yep, that's exactly what we do, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. It's, among states, among countries, as long as you're kind of speaking in the greater, capitalist world, the strategies are the same. The regional differences are largely the same. If you're looking for an area that generates cash flow versus appreciation, all that's among the same. You're just looking on the edges with, in some countries they have VAT, we don't have VAT, but those things are kind of on the edges. What the tax strategies and the deadlines are, that's all on the edges. But, I want to focus on something you said, and that is starting with kind of the end in mind in your business model, but kind of taking it up a level. The purpose you started with the end in mind, and that is you wanted to free up a lifestyle where you can travel a little bit more. You're not tied down. You're a bit freer. Can you talk a little bit about, that is a motivation for your property investing?
Yeah, absolutely. So probably be able to speak on behalf of Aaron and myself here, because we've got very similar values, very similar end goals. And the idea is to be able to have a reliable stream of income or streams of income. Obviously, with books and whatnot, you get a little, a few dollars a month from them as well, which is nice. We always said the same thing at some point, life is life. Things will happen. For example, my fiance is Mexican. We're going to get married next year. And, that creates a whole new raft of experiences and challenges at the same time, which is great. I'm looking forward to it. But in terms of the travel, it's just that sense of freedom, to the best example I can give that, and again, I don't know what it's been like in the US, but in the summer over here, there's been a lot of issues with flights, with various companies. A lot of flights have been cancelled, short haul, like you name it. It's all been cancelled because of various BS that, the companies are given, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if I look at summer flying, a lot of it's going to be people that have been pent up for the last few years, that are desperate for a holiday. In our case, it's, I say in our case, from an English point of view, it's let's go off to Spain, let's go and get some sun, blah, 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 blah. But when it comes down to travel, I know that Aaron, it's in June at some point, he went off to Madeira, which is a tiny set of islands off the African coast, but they're Portuguese. It was out of school time. No issues. He had no issues flying. I was in Mexico at the start of the year. I was there for 2 months. No issues at the airport because you're going in whatever time suits you. So it's just the tiny things like that can make a biggest difference. You're not relying on other people to say, well, you can have a holiday, or you can just, as long as you've got the plans in place, you can just go. And that provides, in my opinion, that provides a bit of freedom to be able to make those decisions. That for us is important. Hopefully that answers the question. Is there anything else you want me to touch upon there, Rory?
No, that does. I mean, in here that, our listeners take away just, for you, travel is associated with freedom. Whatever other people's goals are, that's their freedom in investing, so that they can free up and make decisions for themselves, and they're not necessarily tied down to a location of an employer. They have the freedom to go. And that's where these cash flowing property investments, I think, are wonderful for a large set of our audience.
The travel issues that you have described are also happening here in the United States. I literally just read an article to Rory yesterday as we were driving. I have to read this to you right now. So it was our conversation about, it was a perspective from an airline, a flight attendant, about, some things that can be done with the summer travel crisis. Basically, the airlines, they had a lot of people that took early retirement. They laid a lot of people off a couple of years ago. They were not able to restaff accordingly, and the travel, the volume is higher than it was pre-pandemic. So a lot of the cancellations are because they don't have crews, and they're just offering people tons of money left and right to step off planes, because they're all full flights and everyone's nerves are at an 11 on a 1 to 10 scale. So yeah, it's a very different travel environment from back in the day when I used to be a consultant. I was on the road consistently traveling, and it was a lot more enjoyable. But to your point about time, if you don't have to worry too much about that because you're not stuck in a W-2 job that you don't like with your 2 weeks vacation, maybe 3 weeks that you get in the US. I know in Europe, vacation is a little bit more, it's given out a little more freely, I believe. People have longer periods of time off. But, if you have your time back because you're creating your own cash flow and your own schedule, that is the end game. And real estate and property just happens to be the way to get there. I do have a question related to something that you mentioned about 5 or 10 minutes ago that I want to ask about the book you just put out. You mentioned interest-only loans. Rory, we don't have much of that anymore in the US, right? Unless I'm totally missing something. We had it 10, 12 years ago, back when there was a latter part of the last decade or 2 decades ago.
Some of those loan products are starting to reemerge, but the financial markets here were so skittish after the 2008, 2009 real estate meltdown because they were putting out loans that completely unsustainable, and it brought down the economy in pretty quick order. So things like interest-only loans have been frowned upon, even among commercial investors. But with rates rising and the regulations easing a touch, those products are coming back, but they're still relatively rare. Even if you compare the US to Canada, they're relatively rare here.
But Rob, are those common in the UK?
I just want to sort of fire back before I answer that question. I also read an article about, I think it was Delta Airlines offering $10,000 for flights. If that was me, I'd have taken it and bought gold. I'd have been great. Thanks. See you later. I'll have a bit of that. Thank you. Just genius. Similar things here though with British Airways. It's the same thing. Yeah, I'd say interest only mortgage rates. It normally sparks a lot of debate over here because you've got two ways of looking at it. You've got the point that I mentioned earlier on that inflation, which is, by the way, the ultimate tax in the world with people that don't realize it. But it'll increase the value of certain assets, et cetera, which erodes away the natural capital of the debt. So that is the basis for a lot of people going with interest-only mortgages, because actually the central banks, the governments, they're all going to do it for you, even if you don't realize it at the time. Then you've got the more traditional mortgages, which we would call capital and repayment, or repayment interest, whatever they're called, is where you pay, obviously, you start paying the capital back as well as a bit of the interest. And after, 30 years or whatever it is, that there is no, debt on that property as such. Difference between the two is that if you go with the capital and repayment mortgage, the amount that you pay on the mortgage per month is normally a lot higher than the interest only. So if you're getting into property for cash flow point of view, you could easily erode that cash flow straight away, which defeats the object. But some investors that I know prefer to do that because in 20, 30 years time, they don't want the hassle of dealing with mortgage companies. And, there have been sometimes in the last few, not just few years, I've said the same to Aaron, when part of me knows it doesn't make the most financial sense, but I'd love to be able to pay off all the mortgage companies. If I never have to speak to a mortgage company again, my life would be a lot easier. It seems, I don't know what it's like over there, but it always seems you're just making up rules as they go along. Mm-hmm. We had one, I won't name names, we had one the other day, refinancing a property over here. And we had one the other day and they looked at our gearing. They looked at our gearing on our portfolio and they got the numbers wrong. And you're the bank. Mm-hmm. It's scary if you ask me, but they're the main differences. And it depends who you speak to. It depends. Again, it depends. What's the end goal? If you want to, in 30 years' time, have a bunch of property that's got no mortgage debt, anything like that, then you'll want to pay it off. If you're not too fussed about that because you have a grasp of the economics in the long term, you're probably going to go with interest only.
Yeah. I mean, speak personally also, our portfolio, all of ours are principal and interest loans, which is what we'd call it here in the US. I don't think I was aware that interest only was back and something that we could do. We might look at that also. I do understand that would actually increase cash flow because it brings your monthly payment down. We do have a strategy here where people might take out a 30-year fixed loan and then they will pay extra every month and basically amortize it over 20 or 15 years, to pay it down quicker. But, the flip side of that, a lot of the property growth and a lot of the investing strategy you hear from US investors is to leverage. So, you want a lower payment and you want to be able to pull money out of properties as much as you can through refinancing or home equity lines of credit or home equity loans. So, too much capital is not wrapped up in one particular property. So some of those strategies are similar. I bet you if there were interest-only loans available here in the US more readily, I bet we would actually see more investors looking toward those. I know that people are looking more at adjustable rate mortgages now that interest rates have gone up, especially if it's like a 7-1 ARM, and you're only going to keep the property or refinance it within 7 years. If you can get a good rate on that ARM, you might take that out instead of a 30-year fixed loan. But yeah, that's interesting to hear that you guys have that as an option.
But I mean, is this question about leveraging it comes down to what is your end goal? So as an investor, are you trying to create the most secure retirement that you can? And you want the peace of mind knowing that you don't have the outstanding debt and the debt obligations, then you may want to pay down that principal as quickly as possible. If you are banking on the appreciation, that may alter your goals. But if you're looking for the maximum amount of cash flow now, particularly if you're younger, I can see a compelling case to either extend the amortization or to limit itself to interest only if the deal is right.
Try and tackle that because you raised a couple of really good points there, Rory. Sorry to cut you off there, Jason, as well. Start with the end in mind. I would say that if you're going to get into property in the hope that property prices will increase, then you're barking up the wrong tree. You need to do some proper homework if you're going to get in there and hope that it goes up. It's not always the case. So that's the first thing I'd say to that. Secondly, if you look at the history of house buying, and certainly in this country, probably, I guess, around most of the world, because of the fact that inflation's been around for a very, 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 very long time, the actual asset prices have been steadily, in general, increasing. Of course, it can go up and down, so let's not put anyone under any disillusions. The overarching debt in the long run doesn't concern me, purely because, as far as I'm concerned, as long as the cash flow's there, that's the most important thing to us. The property could be worth £1 million. It could be worth £1. If its cash flows at £500 a month, I don't really care what the asset value is, to be perfectly honest with you, because I'm looking at the cash flow. If I was doing the other strategy, which is your cap at depreciation, yeah, absolutely, I'd be very concerned. But from a cash flow point of view, it doesn't bother me if the asset's worth £1 million or £1. If it provides cash flow, that's the key thing as well. So that's the point I was trying to make.
Kind of push back just with our portfolio in a sense where the capital appreciation has really mattered for properties. We have no intention of selling because they do generate cash flow over time. But that added capital appreciation has unlocked extra equity, which we can in turn tap to turn around as down payments for more property, and it creates more leveraged opportunities for us to grow our portfolio from there. So in a lot of those cases, in the past few years, a lot of that appreciation is false in the sense that it's just the effect of inflation, but that capital appreciation has unlocked opportunities for us to leverage things quite a bit more.
Yeah, congratulations on that. I think the point I was trying to make, if you go into investing into property and you're doing it in the hope that it goes up, then you've got to reconsider why you're doing it. Don't ever base an investment decision on hope. I think that was the point I was trying to make. You guys have got a great example there of how the increase in your portfolio has led to more opportunities, which, is obviously great in this, but it's part of the joys of property investing.
Can see that agree completely with that point that, parking money and enduring cash flow losses or just, breaking even cash flow wise in the hopes that something's going to appreciation is a dangerous proposition. It's almost a gamble.
And to your point, Rob, hope is not a strategy, is it? We've heard that lots of times. Let's talk about your book that you just published a few months ago, Property FAQs, Answers to Frequently Asked Property Questions. I know that financing is one of those FAQs. What are some other questions that you have fielded over the past couple of years or months of your speaking on your podcast and talking to people that are interested in real estate investing?
We get, as you can imagine, when you're having really good conversations with people, you can get all sorts of questions. The key ones, or the ones that we've had from our networking, how do you get started? It's normally the biggest issue. I think that's probably fair in most walks of life, actually. It's okay talking a good game, but actually taking that first step, can be challenging mentally. So that's a lot of things we get. It's actually, how do you get started? Over here, what do you need to look for? So how do I know if an area is good? How do I know if it's not good? Where should I buy? Now that's like the $1 million question. The answer is always, it depends. It depends on what you want, what you're looking for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What else has popped up? We get the odd finance question. I always say the same, that especially in property FAQs, we've got a broker section at the back that was written by Mark Champ of Muth Financial. We get on really well with Mark. He knows his stuff. So there's some great questions and answers from a mortgage broker himself at the back there. If anyone ever asks us any financial questions, I normally give the same answer. I'm not an independent financial advisor. Please don't actually take anything I say as advice. Always speak to your professionals, whether that's a mortgage broker, tax accountant, whomever. But I'd say most of the questions revolve around good areas and how you get started.
It's worth checking out. I mean, those are all questions that we hear as well. We just haven't written them down in a book format like you have. So congratulations for actually getting them all compiled for everyone to just be able to pick up and pick your brain. Where do you start is a question that comes up all the time, for any kind of real estate investors or meetups or people that we talk to that know that we're doing this and they want to get into it, but they don't know where to begin. It's a great question, and there's lots of and it's like we're doing this podcast probably for reasons like why you're doing yours, so people can tell the story about why they started and where they're headed. And I've said this many times in this podcast before that this is not a zero-sum game. We're all here to educate each other, because you don't have to win and I lose. I don't have to win for you to lose. Like, we could both win because we're learning together. And, the lessons that you're telling us in the United Kingdom are very, very similar to lessons here in the US. And that actually helps underline the points of like why these are good lessons to learn in forums like this. Let's talk about your podcast, the Property Nomads Podcast. You actually have an interesting flow of the episodes that you release that are alternating between travel and property. So how'd you come up with the idea for the podcast, and what has that experience been like?
Podcasting's been good fun, as you guys can attest to. Really good. Definitely got a lot of lessons out of it. Certainly, as with any podcast, if you listen back to your first episodes, and compare them to the episodes that we all produce now, I think it's fair to say that most people would have improved significantly in podcast quality and content. Yeah, the way that we have the podcast is that normally the main episode, which is a Monday, is normally property based. Sometimes it isn't, actually. Sometimes it could be chats with other professionals that we've had. So again, tax accountants, insurance, all that sort of stuff, whatever is interesting basically at the time. And then the Thursday episodes have been travel. That all came about because Aaron found all of our photos from 2014, 2015. Now, in a nutshell, we went to the World Cup, FIFA World Cup soccer World Cup, whatever you want to call it, in Brazil. So we flew out to Brazil. We were in Rio de Janeiro for 6 weeks. And we went around South America, ended up in Mexico, so ended up in Central America. But we'd lost all the photos. Obviously, phones have changed and that sort of stuff. But he found them on an old CD a little while ago. So that prompted all the memories to come back. It's, I remember doing that. Oh, this was here, that was there, and this happened. I was like, do you know what? I might as well take, a few days out. And I did this last summer. So then I'll take a few days out. I'll record it because now actually I can remember what happened. There's some great stories in there. So that's how the travel episodes came about. At the moment, they're very reflective of things that we've done previously. I mean, that might change in due course. So, I mean, who knows? But that's where we are at the moment. And as with yourselves, it's working with the listeners, working with people that love listening to the show. What do you like? What do you not like? Do you want it all travel? Do you want it all property? And people are happy with the blend at the moment. But again, audience engagement. We'll see what happens, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. It's an interesting twist to a traditional real estate podcast that I'm sure that we all listen to, and you as a listener are probably listening to us along with many other real estate podcasts. There's a long list of them, and a lot of them are really good. And, the fact that you've actually twisted some of your travel stories into yours adds some good diversity into all the real estate lessons that you're telling. So congratulations for finding your way down that pathway. And I hope that you've enjoyed recording the episodes that you have, because, we certainly enjoy recording the Real Estate Law podcast. So why don't we get to our final questions? We'd love to hear how you can, wrap things up and answer the same 3 questions that everybody else that's been on this podcast has answered. And then we'll let you tell everyone where they could find you if they want to reach out to you. We'll certainly put everything in the show notes as well. So question number 1, really curious to hear your answer to this one, because this could be a lot of different things. If you can get on stage for 30 minutes and talk about any subject in the world with 0 preparation, what would that be?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a very good question. I'd be inclined to talk about gold, to be honest. I think it's, as you say, it could be anything. I'd be inclined to talk about gold. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that, to me, it seems that a lot of people around the world don't realize what's going on. And gold has been a very good servant to the world for 5,000 years plus. So it's been around for a long time, a lot of history. I think it's underloved, underappreciated as an asset class in itself. So yeah, I'd probably get up on stage and chat about that, which would probably lead me to a multitude of subjects. But yeah, gold is my answer to that question.
Would silver be the counterpoint if you had to debate somebody? Yeah,
absolutely. Silver, copper, aluminium, zinc. I mean, I don't know as much about those, but given the way that certain people in the world want the world to go, if there ends up being a lot more solar panels, et cetera, they do require things like copper, silver, zinc. So actually, it's quite an commodities in general, quite interesting to deep dive into.
I was waiting for you to say the Jets.
But I had a feeling you were hoping that was the answer. So I don't want to do it.
Hey, gold and commodities will continue to showcase your intellect. The New York Jets, you could showcase your intellect, but then we would question your reasoning as to why you picked them. But that's okay. Second question that we have is, tell us something that happened early in your life or career that impacts the way that you're working today.
If I think about our early properties, so in terms of, we made a lot of mistakes on the first couple of properties in terms of refurbishments and a couple of external things like low valuations and things like that. And I think that those incidents helped to build up a lot more mental resolve and actually help us to understand that, anything can happen. If someone has a bad day at the office and they're outvaluing a home, that can have some serious consequences. So I think that and refurbing, we learned a lot from the first couple of properties. That's put us in good stead for future purchases.
Yeah. People never make that first purchase and it's the best one. You always learn from mistakes along the way and improve upon that. So one thing we have short-term rentals, which we've talked about a lot in this podcast. And, we encourage people for that first year to just kind of break even and just get your systems in place. Don't expect to make a ton that first year. Don't lose your shirt either, but build your systems and then move from there. And then a couple of years later, you're going to look back at that first year and say, I'm really glad that I, didn't set a massively high expectation or goal, because, then you'll get disappointed. I mean, cover your costs, get your systems in place, and start making some money.
I would just just to cement that point, as probably heard the phrase, Rome wasn't built in a day. These things take time. Property is not is not necessarily a get rich quick. You get wealthy slowly. And if you have that mentality and you go into it with that, you'll be absolutely fine.
What a great soundbite. I got to tell the producer to isolate that one. Our final question for you, Rob, is tell us something you're listening to, watching, or reading these days.
I've got a bit addicted, I'd say, to Forged in Fire. I have no idea if you're familiar with that program at all. No. It basically, it's metalworking, metallurgy, blacksmithing. It's an American program, actually. So it's basically, in a nutshell, you get 4 contestants. Normally, you get 4 contestants. They go into the forge, on the forge floor. They've got 3 or 4 experts there that are going to put the swords and whatnot to the test. Mm-hmm. They normally have to create their own sword to start off with. Then they normally put a handle on it after a round of testing. And then the judges are testing. I mean, they're cutting antlers, cutting copper, all of this sort of stuff. And then they have to create 2 people from that, then have to recreate an iconic weapon from history. I've seen everything, Roman swords, whatever. So I'm a bit addicted to that program at the moment. It's good fun. It's interesting to watch. And, I'm actually learning a lot about metallurgy and blacksmithing. I might have to go and have like an experience day in the UK and get behind a forge myself. So that's what I'm watching at the moment. I know it's, we've all got to have our own downtime, and that could be whatever we want it to be. And that program, I've got a bit of an addiction to that at the moment.
I love how you tied your first and third answers together with elements. And it looks like it's on the History Channel here in the US. I had never heard of it before. I'd
recommend a couple of episodes. I just enjoy it. It's simple watching. Doesn't take up a lot of mental bandwidth. And I've always said to my business partners, because he's the one that got me into it, I said, if I can get in the phrase "a canister of Damascus" into a conversation at some point this year, I'll be loving it. That'll be my year complete if I can fit that into a conversation.
I think you just did.
Yeah.
Right. Rob, tell us, where can people find you if they'd like to learn more about you, listen to your podcast, find your books? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So you touched on it earlier on, the books on Amazon. I would recommend, I'd recommend them all, of course, but Property FAQs. There's another one called 101 Top Property Tips. That was an amalgamation of people giving their best tips, and we put it into a book. So I'd recommend that as well. And for those that are European based that are listening, that are thinking about getting into the UK market, I'd recommend Buy to Let How to Get Started. That is very UK orientated, that book. Check us out at the Property Nomads Podcast. We're the usual platforms, Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, that sort of stuff. I'll send over a link tree to put in the show notes that has everything on there as well. And any personal questions, I always say email me, rob@tpnpodcast.com. You can imagine quite active, so I'll try and get back to people where I can. But they'll be the best ways to find us.
Awesome. Found that link tree actually prior to this episode. So we have all those links. We will put them all in the show notes so people can download episodes of the podcast, go buy the book, reach out to you, learn more about you and your business partner, all the work that you guys are doing. Rory, any final thoughts or...
This is a great conversation. Listen to it and just kind of draw from it kind of the universal things that we've been preaching for a while about how to get into real estate and how to make it work for you. Other than that, if people want to find me, I'm at my real estate brokerage, NextHome Titletown, nexthometitletowns.com, or my law practice, UrbanVillage Legal, urbanvillagelegal.com.
Rob, you'll have to let us know if you're ever in the New England when the Jets are playing the Patriots. We'll take you out to a pub in Boston and show you some of the sites.
It sounds good to me. I'll return the favour. If you ever have to be in and around London, again, let me know, and it'd be an honour to, again, have a couple of beers, go see some sport and show some of the sites. So I'll return the favour.
Awesome. Well, we love that. That's very generous of you. So that's it. That's another episode of the Real Estate Law Podcast. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. If you have enjoyed it, we'd love it if you can give us a great rating, or you can give us a comment, or you can reach out to me directly, Jason@nexthometitletown.com. Thumbs up, subscribe, all those things help us reach more and more listeners with great conversations like the one that we've just had. So on behalf of Rob, thank you. Rory, thank you. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye.
This has been the Real Estate Law Podcast, because real estate is more than just pretty pictures, and law goes well beyond the paperwork and courtroom arguments. We're powered by NextHome Titletown, Greater Boston's progressive real estate brokerage. More at NextHomeTitletown.com. And UrbanVillage Legal, Massachusetts Real Estate Counsel, serving savvy property owners, lenders, and investors. More at UrbanVillageLegal.com. Today's conversation was not legal advice, but we hope you found it entertaining and informative. Discover more at realestatelawpodcast.com. Thank you for listening.